With more on the politics of the Nord Stream 2 gas pipeline, I'm joined now by Dr. Thomas O'Donnell. He's with the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin. Thank you very much for speaking to us again on the development of this gas pipeline. Why do you think the AfD are invested in this? What are their motivations here?
Well, good morning, Rosie. Thanks for having me. Well, as you know, the AfD is a far-right party, and for various reasons, their ideology, they're Eurosceptic, they're anti-immigrant, and they're very pro-Moscow. They seem similar to Mr. Trump to admire a strong man like Mr. Putin. Perhaps that's the model they'd like for Germany. But it's not just the far right. Every party in parliament here in Germany, when the Green Party put forward a proposal that there should be a moratorium on Nord Stream 2 in the parliament, all the other parties were, as the Financial Times reporter here said, savaged. They savaged the Green Party. Every party from the far left to the far right and in between voted against a moratorium on Nord Stream 2. They all support Nord Stream 2.
Now, what's your analysis of the US concerns? We know that there's been the threat of sanctions. Do you think this gas pipeline would make Europe dependent on Russia? Well,
to be clear, and I've interviewed American experts many times in Washington about this, everybody knows Europe is dependent. This was a decision made by principally Germany in the 1980s when these big pipelines were built from Siberia to bring all this gas. 40% of Europe's gas comes from Russia, and 80% of that goes through Ukraine. So the dependence is real. It's going to take decades to get rid of the dependence. For the United States, this has, of course, always been a concern. But these pipelines now that go through Ukraine and Belarus are now a problem for Mr. Putin because, as we know, Belarus and Ukraine are essentially in revolt against dominance by Moscow. He now, in order to continue his business with Europe, would like to get those pipelines out to build a pipeline around the north called Nord Stream and one around the south through the Black Sea and the Balkans called, it was called South Stream, Turk Stream. Now, the Americans oppose this. If he could accomplish these two pipelines, he would completely eliminate the strategic dependence on Ukraine and Belarus, which would free him up to then, of course, put further subvert those countries or have military interference in those countries to bring them back into the Russian orbit. So these are two different strategic visions for Europe. Completing these pipelines so Putin can escape the dependence on these countries and bring them back, do what he needs to do to subvert them and bring them into his influence, or, we continue with what we have, and this severely constrains Mr. Putin.
Does Europe have a plan to counter any potential Russian interference?
Yes, Europe does have a plan. The EU has moved along step by step. One thing in particular and the Americans have supported this too, everybody knows that Putin used these pipelines through Belarus and Ukraine initially mainly for to make deals with oligarchs, to bring oligarchs into his orbit, to make it actually it's what's called elite capture in these countries. So what Europe did is they insisted that if they're going to continue doing business transiting this gas to Europe, they have to come under European law. They have to have these pipelines in Ukraine cannot be owned by Gazprom, cannot be owned by whoever owns the gas. And this makes it much more difficult for that kind of corruption inside the country. And Ukraine has done pretty well on this front by trying to take this out of this kind of corruption. So this was one very big thing. Now, Europe wants to have diversity also of supply, and, there's various other places. This includes, of course, bringing gas from the United States, LNG, but from other parts of the world as well, from Qatar and from Australia or wherever they might bring it from. So its diversity is one thing, and the other thing is imposing European law, market regulations, so that it's difficult for Gazprom to have its monopolistic and subversion type of tactics. And the United States has gone along with that as well.
Thank you very much for your time. Thomas O'Donnell, he's with the Hertie School of Governance in Berlin.
Thank you.
Still to come here, we're going to be looking at how Poland elected its first democratic leader exactly 30 years ago today.